In the first winters of this full-scale war, Russia tried to freeze out the Ukrainians. They failed. And now Ukraine is melting down Russia's oil empire. Hi, this is Joe Lindsley talking to you from Kyiv, Ukraine. First, as I say, here in Kyiv, General Kellogg from the United States, Trump's envoy to Ukraine, visited for Ukrainian Independence Day. And every time General Kellogg is here, there are no attacks on Kyiv city. So people do feel that he's sort of the best air defense. And actually, ever since the Alaska meeting was announced, so before that Alaska meeting, there has not been a Russian attack on Kyiv city after a very difficult and brutal July. While General Kellogg was here, he attended Ukraine's National Prayer Breakfast, which is a tradition they took several years ago from the United States. And you had leaders of Ukraine's Orthodox, Jewish, Catholic, Greek Catholic, Crimean Tatar, Muslim, and President Zelensky and his wife, General Kellogg, and Mark Burns, who has been a pastor to Donald Trump. We're all gathered, meeting, in the morning in Kyiv and praying together, and it felt like a very American style moment in a way that Americans would appreciate, and but that is also very much a Ukrainian way to speak about their faith and to share these things together. Several weeks ago, everyone was saying that the city of Pokrovsk, the little city of Pokrovsk, was going to fall into Russian hands. In fact, the experts were saying that a year ago, pretty much a year ago from this week, that Pokrovsk was going to fall within a few weeks, and then it didn't, and then it didn't, and then it didn't. And Ukrainians have held on. I mean, the Russians have absolutely destroyed much of the city, and the civilians have had to flee. But the point is that Ukraine still holds that position, and we always hear these headlines that it's going to fall, but we don't hear the reverse. When it doesn't fall, when the prediction doesn't come true, that's not usually a headline. And some units of the elite Ukrainian Azov Brigade repositioned themselves, and it seems that they had some breakthroughs. They were able to actually stop the Russian advance. The Russians were starting to push through to take Pokrovsk a few weeks ago, and that has been curtailed a bit. Of course, by the time you see this report, that could change. But whatever you see about Pokrovsk and the day that Pokrovsk might fall, let's remember that it was supposed to fall a year ago. And because Ukrainians held on for a year, almost over a year now, other places did not fall. And it's very easy to sort of forget that perspective. But while Ukraine is, waiting to see what kind of support it can get, and also, but not just waiting, developing their own tools, which we're going to get into in a moment, it's important that these places can hold. Speaking of developing Ukraine's own tools, in the past few weeks, really in the month of August, Ukraine has knocked out 13% of Russia's oil refinery capacity in just a few weeks. And the government in Kyiv is calling this cheekily direct sanctions. Forget about secondary sanctions and everything else. The best sanction is simply stopping, as Greta Thunberg might say, just stop Russian oil. And that's what Ukrainians are doing. And they're causing great chaos within Russia. Long lines of cars and trucks at the gas stations throughout Russia. People are traveling in the summer. They can't really travel to many countries, and so they're trying to travel within Russia, and that's causing chaos. And as the harvest season approaches, this is also very difficult. So this is, anyone who's paying attention to Ukraine knows that the Russian war machine is funded by fuel, and so hitting Russia on energy is something that I know that privately, going back to the Biden administration, they did not want Ukraine to touch that infrastructure at all because they were afraid of its effect on global gas prices. And but Ukrainians are doing this now in a sustained campaign, and the campaign is affecting some nations in Europe, especially Slovakia and Hungary, which have been no real friends to Ukraine. And there's the Druzhba pipeline, which means friendship, ironically, that goes from Russia through Ukraine to Slovakia and Hungary. And despite Russia's attempts to, despite the fact that Russia is engaged in working to destroy Ukraine, that the nature of contracts and all that, that oil has been flowing from Russia through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. But with these recent Ukrainian attacks, there have been interruptions in that supply. And this is further enraged, for example, Viktor Orban, the Hungarian prime minister. But he's done nothing for Ukraine, so there's no love lost there. I think Ukrainians are realizing that this is a card that they do have, and they have to start playing it. And speaking of cards, there was the news that of the new Ukrainian long range missile, the Flamingo, so called because there was a mishap in the production, and part of it came out pink. And the Firepoint, the company that produced it, the Ukrainian firm that produced it, said that that was not their intention, but they chose to call it such. It's hard to know. I mean, there's OPSEC, and it's hard to know the exact reality of this. The proof is always in the results. But Ukraine is definitely trying to show that they are producing some extraordinary tech that's not just tiny drones. Also, just in the past week, there's news of the Long Neptune, which is an improvement upon the original Ukrainian Neptune, which the whole world saw worked quite well. That the original Neptune was what Ukrainians used to sink Russia's flagship in the Black Sea, the Moskva, back in 2022. And what I like about Ukrainian innovation and sort of the mentality here is, okay, the Neptune worked really well in hitting targets in the Black Sea, made the Black Sea safer, but let's make it better. If this is working, let's find a way to make it better. And so not only do the Ukrainians have the Flamingo with a range of about 3,000 kilometers, but they also have the Long Neptune with a range of about 1,000 kilometers. And so this really gives them a lot of, new, interesting tools to strike into Russia. And as President Zelensky just said, they don't need anyone else's permission to use these weapons officially, because all the parts and everything was made here, more or less, in Ukraine. So that's rather important because of some other developments we see. We have the news that came out just about a week ago that Tulsi Gabbard, as director of national intelligence in the White House, stopped intel sharing with the Brits and the other Five Eyes nations with which the U.S. has close intelligence partnership. She ordered the stoppage of sharing of intel about Ukrainian-Russian negotiations. That upset a lot of people, and then at the same time, right around the same time, we heard that news. So she stopped that back in July, or July 20th, but we just found out about it a few days ago. And right about the same time, we also found out that the Pentagon has restricted Ukraine from using American missiles and even European missiles if they're reliant on American data on Russian soil. And so everyone saw this headline, and so the headline comes out a few days after the Trump-Zelensky White House meeting. So we had a few days where it seemed like Zelensky and Trump were getting along, and things were once again maybe turning toward a better direction. And then we see this headline that Ukraine had been restricted from using long-range weapons on Russian soil. But if you actually read the story, and you have to dig pretty deeply into the story, it was a new leak of older information. This Pentagon policy under Secretary Pete Hegseth was from June and July, and so we don't know the status of it now. But there's a few interesting things to pay attention to there. It was reported that this review mechanism about whether or not Ukraine can hit on Russian soil with American tools is created by Elbridge Colby, the U.S. Defense Undersecretary, and he's a known skeptic of Ukraine. And his name has come up before in this, as going back months, back into the winter, as someone who is trying to limit American help for Ukraine within the Trump administration. So there's two options here, as I see it. One, Trump is trying to test different approaches, maybe to confuse people, or simply to see what might work. Or two, President Trump has disloyal underminers still working for him, and he's dealt with that before. I mean, when he was president the first time, he had disloyal underminers in a different way. For example, the twins, Alexander and Eugene Vindman, who were working for the U.S. military, working in the White House, who undermined Trump, even though they were unelected, and that happened in a different way in 2019. But now the question is Trump facing a new type of undermining as he moves to consider supporting Ukraine? Is he meeting this opposition with from the Pentagon? So this is a very important question that really should be focused on and not ignored. Speaking of that, when I say the Pentagon, President Trump suggested the other day that it would be good to rename the Department of Defense to go back to its original name, the Department of War. That was changed right at the end of World War II. He said, what's the point of defense? We got to sound stronger. I mean, you think of the American eagle with the olive branch and the arrows. And so, in a way, that could be a good thing, to signal American strength. But it's possible that the Department of Defense will be called the Department of War, which at least would be an acknowledgement that the world is on fire, which it is. A little side note, a glimpse into the internal political things here in Ukraine. But the new prime minister of Ukraine, the first woman to be prime minister of Ukraine, she confirmed quite uncomfortably to America's Radio Free Europe that her brother is living abroad in the war. So is not here, and so not subject to conscription in the way that most Ukrainian men are forbidden from even leaving the country. And it's a touchy subject because a lot of people think that, maybe the elites can be protected. But then people also say, well, if I was in such a situation, I would be protecting my own. And it's a tricky thing. I mean, this is part of what Russia, it's a difficult thing to be in a full scale war. It's designed to be a heavy toll and a psychological burden. But that is causing a little bit of consternation within the society here, of course. And I realized on Sunday it was Ukrainian Independence Day, and you can look at my thread on X, my reflections that I wrote. Just thinking about 3.5 years of war reporting and what have I learned here. I went to my regular coffee shop, and on that morning, and I said to the barista, I said in Ukrainian, "Happy Independence Day." And she said to me in English, she said, "What does independence mean for you?" It's both a Ukrainian sincerity, but it's also people in war are going to speak, you want to speak honestly. You don't know how much time you have alive. And so, 8 o'clock in the morning, that was the question I got in my coffee shop. What does independence mean for you? And she asked me to come outside with her, and they had a poster on the wall on the outside of this cafe where you could write. People wrote on little trident-shaped birds what freedom and independence and liberty mean to them. And so I wrote a thread on X. After I drank the coffee, I had more time to think about it on different things I've learned, about 10 or 12 things I've realized here in the war. And I just mentioned one of them here now. For years after I quit my career at the world of Roger Ailes and News Corp, and I ran away from this idea. I hated the idea of talking about left and right, conservative and liberal. I still don't like that in many ways, but the war here and Ukraine's resistance and the world's reaction has revealed something that it's pretty clear to me about what we want to call conservatives and what we want to call liberals. Conservatives are paralyzed by paranoia very often, but when they believe in a cause, they commit fully and strategically. Conservatives paralyzed by paranoia, but when they believe in a cause, they commit fully and strategically. Now, liberals are inspired and moved and motivated by noble ideals, not restricted by the same paranoia that the conservatives often have, or the same skepticism, but inspired by these noble ideals. But despite that motivation and inspiration, they will not do what it takes to achieve that noble ideal. That's how I see it among liberals and conservatives. This is not the far left and the far right, but this is liberals and conservatives in general around the world. And I think if for me that explains the world's reaction or lack of reaction to what's happening here in Ukraine. And lastly, I'll say please check out our weekly Boosters and Bastards video here on YouTube, link in the description. This week, we take a look at the nation of Estonia, which is a great booster for Ukraine. And in the process of preparing, a week of videos about Estonia, I learned a lot about the Forest Brothers resistance, which was from the end of World War II until 1978. Estonians living in the forest, resisting the Soviets, refusing to submit for all those decades. Incredible stories. Also, how Estonians sang themselves to freedom against Moscow in the 1980s, literally by singing, is how they were able to break away from the Soviet Union. And also, how Estonians use their tech ingenuity to build cyber resilience for the free world, including for Ukraine. It's a project called the Talon Mechanism, and you can learn about it in our special feature on Estonia in our Boosters and Bastards series. So, anyway, thank you for taking the time to listen to this report. We're reviving our YouTube channel here. You can also always follow me on X at JP Lindsley and on Instagram at JP Lindsley as well. Please like, follow, and subscribe. And I'll keep reporting here. We keep going step by step, malo po malo, to victory. Thank you from Kyiv.